As long as we're on the record now, if you could just sort of describe to voters, we'll get into what you've accomplished in your time in Congress, but looking at yourself and your opponent, highlight for us why you were the best fit for this district.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for having me with you today, Sun Sentinel. And listen, I think it's going to be a clear choice. Where can I start? Let me first start with our freedom, women's access to legal abortion. I am for women being able to make their own decisions about their reproductive freedom, their health, their future, their lives. I'm for access to the ballot box. My opponent, who not only opposes abortion, would ban abortion across the country. His last fundraiser was held by Roger Stone, the architect of the election fraud for Donald Trump. I believe in climate change and that we can do something about it. And I, as the grandmother of two young boys growing up here in Palm Beach County, I fear for their safety and the safety of our families. I voted to ban assault weapons and to expand background checks for people who buy guns. So we differ on a lot of these issues. Also, I have been here in this county a long time, and I went to Washington as a mayor, as a problem solver, because that's what you have to do as a mayor. And I spend a lot of time working with my local people, making sure that they are being able to take advantage of some of the infrastructure programs and the climate change programs that are coming our way, bringing back millions of dollars in community projects for the homeless, for survivors of domestic violence, for boys and girls clubs, for health clinics. I guess I'm, in a sense, their mayor in Washington, D.C. But I will say this. I think my grandchildren are growing up here, and I see problem solving through the lens as the mother of a small business person, the daughter of a 97-year-old mother, and, of course, the grandmother of two young boys.
You mentioned your opponent. I do want to say, while we're on the record here, that we did send our candidate questionnaire to both parties. We have not heard back from your opponent in that regard, which is why you're alone with us today. As I mentioned in my last question, I'd like you also to look back. You mentioned some of the money that you brought to the district, but could you look back and tell me, what are you proudest of that you've accomplished in your time in Congress, and what are some things that you wish had gone differently over the past few years?
Well, I have been very fierce, especially in fighting for rights of women and families. I've chaired the Women's Caucus for many, many years, the Bipartisan Women's Caucus, now the Democratic Women's Caucus, for about 10 years now, and really have leading efforts now to keep abortion safe and legal. As a member of the Appropriations Committee on Health and Human Services, I have been a very strong advocate for money for health research, for research on gun violence, on child care, on education, any of the quality of life issues that our families depend upon. I spent many years on the Foreign Affairs Committee, had an opportunity to work on many issues in a bipartisan way, and I found that to be very exhilarating. Brought that now to the Appropriations Committee, where I sit on the committee that funds the State Department. I've been a very strong advocate for the security of Israel, to make sure that we stand up to our commitment for their security. And I am proud to have just recently voted for a bill that's going to cap the cost of insulin and cap how much people on Medicare have to pay out of pocket for drugs, and have Medicare able to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs, and the largest investment ever in combating climate change.
What are the other part of that question was, what are some things you kind of had wished you went the other way? And I guess another way to phrase that is, what are some things that you wanted to get done, in the past congressional session that didn't get done and that you are going to try to do in the future?
Well, let me just say this. I'm about to get passed in November one of the most important pieces of legislation that's going to affect everyone's security in the workplace. And it's a bipartisan bill. We just passed it in the Senate. Incidentally, my sponsor there was Marsha Blackburn, who is a Republican. And that bill is going to end what's called non-disclosure agreements that people are forced to sign in the workplace that will protect both men and women from having to be gagged and not tell anyone about sexual assaults or sexual harassment. And that is going to protect a lot of people in the workplace. We're going to pass that bill in November. Where I wish we could have done more, and President Biden, I give him so much credit for trying to do this, is to have a family leave policy in this country, to get the cost of childcare down. These are two issues that affect our working families so tremendously, especially women, and we see especially the impact after COVID. So many women still having to return to the workplace, but can't even afford to.
And by leave, you're talking about paid family leave as opposed to family medical leave that was passed in '93.
Paid family leave, yes.
Are you aware of just how different our country is compared to other countries around the globe in that regard?
Well, if you're talking about, yes, you mean more of the economically wealthy countries where there's some sort of democracy. Yes. Child care is more accessible. Family leave is accessible. It's really quite. I don't know. I guess it's almost an embarrassment that we don't have that here.
Why are we constantly going on about how America is the greatest country in the world, and yet we are the only industrialized country that doesn't actually have paid medical leave? What happened?
Well, I'm not gonna downgrade our country. I do think we are the greatest country in the world. But listen, we can always do better, and that definitely is one area that we should do better, and that's something that I'm going to continue the fight.
Okay, Martin, did you have any questions?
But Martin's
your
muted.
Microphone is on. Or your microphone's off. Martin, your microphone is off.
I turned the mic off because the phone was ringing. My wife and I took a European vacation a few years ago, and with a group, or tour rather. And everywhere we went, some other American in the tour inevitably was asking the people in the Scandinavian and European countries about the high taxes they pay. And in every instance, they said, "Look, we got something for it. We've got good health care. We got family leave." In fact, in Sweden, we were told how it works both ways. Both mother and father can claim the leave together or at different times. The men, we were told, always schedule theirs during the soccer championship season, so they can be home to watch it. But nowhere did any of our hosts or any of our tour guides say we have a problem with the cost. We're happy with what we get.
Martin, did you have a question to follow up?
No, I have no question to follow up. It was just an observation.
Okay. When you mentioned that what was going to get passed in November, that specifically that bill would make it so that harassment or assault claims cannot be covered by an NDA. Is that right?
So what that means is right now, and this is, I think people would be somewhat shocked unless you saw the whole thing with Fox News and Gretchen Carlson and so forth. I think there was a movie, a famous movie about this where right now, if a woman or a man is sexually harassed or sexually assaulted in the workplace, and they have signed it's called an NDA when they go into employment. They are signing an agreement that says, if I am assaulted or if I am harassed, I will not tell anyone about it. And if I tell someone about it, what that means is they will be sued. So actually, the law now is someone could actually be sexually assaulted on the workplace. And if they disclose it even to a spouse, the rapist, the assaulter can sue them, or their company can sue them for disclosure.
What is the bill number on this building? Does it have a number?
I don't know the number. We can get that for you, but it's we'll be passing it in November. It's going to be a big victory for making the workplace much, much safer for all of us. And it's one of those bipartisan bills. I mean, really, you almost have to do, you have to get these kinds of bills passed, they have to be bipartisan.
Well, it's good to hear there still are some.
You're first of all, have you met your opponent? Done any forums, debates, anything?
No.
Haven't met him at all?
No.
Okay. What do your election is, I mean, I know everybody who runs for office always runs like they're losing. I understand that, but your election seems relatively in a relatively safe district, but the control of the House itself is certainly another matter. What do you think are the major results should the Democrats lose control of the House in November? And I mean, the one that comes to mind right away is the end of the January 6th committee. But can you kind of point out to people what the stakes are there?
Well, first, let me just say, the people who want me to get reelected have to come out to vote, or I'm not going to win this reelection. So, just make that clear. Nothing is a slam dunk anymore. It's because we're in a very partisanly charged atmosphere. Listen, the only saving grace if the Republicans get into power is that President Biden will be there to veto some pretty horrific things. Number one, I believe there are bills that are going to try to ban abortion across this nation. There are already bills filed. They're going to try to repeal immediately many of our efforts. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act, they will try to repeal that. Very historic effort to reduce climate change, historic effort to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. They're going to treat those bills like they did the Affordable Care Act, which would have been repealed, reversed, had John McCain, and not at the last minute, not gone along with that. So you're going to see investigations. They'll be investigating Anthony Fauci and Joe Biden, and it's going to be, you will see some of the most extreme members of the Congress with some very extreme bills that will pass.
It might be a time to be thankful for the Senate filibuster.
You never know.
The shoe fits both ways.
And that's certainly true, regardless of who is in charge of the Senate come after the November elections. It's certainly going to be within the 60 vote range, is it not?
Yeah, it will be still. Well, don't trust Mitch McConnell. Look what happened to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. All right. So you've given us the parade of horribles. Should the Republicans take control of the House? And you mentioned some of the things that you're working on specifically. But what if Democrats retain the House in November? What do you think voters could expect in the next couple of years?
We need to do a lot more on gun violence, reducing gun violence. Nobody is more sensitive to that than probably the folks here in South Florida. as we still mourning the loss down there in Parkland. I was with one of the fathers this weekend. Their pain's never going to go away. But what we got to do is prevent the pain and the loss for so many other families. So we need to do a lot more about that. I would like to see us continue our efforts to make sure that Medicare is secure for the next generation, and continue our efforts to combat climate change. We have a lot of things in progress. We have to make sure they get implemented, making sure that infrastructure funding is getting out, making sure we pass legislation to incentivize the chips manufacturing here in the United States. That'll help us produce cars and computers without having to rely on other countries to send us what's called these chips. And I believe you're going to see more and more effort to get more manufacturing back in the United States. Why? Because we learned a lot from COVID. And what we learned is that we have been overly reliant on other countries for things that we need for our quality of life. So I think you're going to continue to see that. And of course, if the Democrats get back into power, once again, we're going to try to get the Women's Health Protection Act passed, which would ensure access to legal abortion across this country. Right now, almost half the states in this country are in the process of either banning or severely restricting access to legal abortion. And that, you could talk to most women and they will tell you this. Women need to be in control of their own reproductive health. That's all there is to it, because these politicians, whether they're in Tallahassee, that's the ones who are affecting us here in Florida, they cannot possibly know the circumstances of each family.
I have one follow-up question to what you just said. Is it possible that the reason American manufacturing has declined is because the tax code encourages profit taking rather than reinvesting? The point has always been made that the video cassette recorder was an American invention. Try buying one made in the United States. We're great at inventing things and letting somebody else exploit them. Does that have any relationship to the tax code?
I would have to think that one out. Martin always throws out a question. I will say this: what we just did with chips is we are incentivizing manufacturers to manufacture here. And so whether it's with your tax code or whether it's with grants, this is where government can play a role. So whether, I don't know specifically the tax code, the part you're talking about, but yeah, I mean, that's where we have opportunities, is either with the tax code or with grants to encourage manufacturing here. And other things. I mean, let me just say, I was because I was a mayor during a recession, and we had a balance. Obviously, we had to do some cost cutting, a lot of cost cutting, but we also did a lot of investments. We were able to do investments in infrastructure. So you want to position yourself. We're obviously, people are struggling now. We're in inflationary period. We're not going to snap our fingers and get out of it. But I really believe that we're positioning ourselves that as we come out of the inflation, this country is going to be much stronger than ever, because we're going to be fixing our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our internet. We're going to be encouraging new jobs at the same time while reducing the climate change. We're encouraging chips manufacturing, so that we're doing a lot of things, and we're lowering the cost of prescription drugs. So we're doing a lot of things that I believe is going to make this country ready and a much better position to be an economic to be the economic leader we should be in this world.
Immigration is, of course, a federal purview, but our governor has also waded into that by using state money to ship people from Texas to other parts of the country. Now, he says that he does that to highlight that there is a crisis at the border. Regardless of the infamy of what exactly he did, do you agree that there is a crisis at the border right now? And what should the federal government be doing about that?
Yes.
Because obviously shipping people to Martha's Vineyard is not the way.
Right. It's pretty terrible what's happening at the border. Some background, though, of course, is why we were in the height of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. The President Trump used federal law, to stop people from coming into the country. So without commenting on that, but what happened was literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are fleeing some horrendous conditions, whether it's in Venezuela or it's not necessarily Mexico, but horrendous conditions are basically piled up at the border. So, but here's the thing. It's not, you're not going to, the problem with immigration is just not what's happening at the border. We also have in this country a real labor shortage, I mean, you cannot go any place without seeing help wanted signs. And so you cannot treat immigration and the immigration reform we need as just as a crisis at the border. There needs to be really bipartisan immigration reform. There needs to be a path to citizenship for the people who are here that are undocumented. And certainly there needs to be more resources, technology used at the border to make sure that people only are able to come in here legally. But that means also more resources for more judges and folks, so that these asylum claims can be processed, because our country, we do believe in asylum for people, and people have to be orderly processed. But so let me just break this down very simply. There has to be an orderly process for people to come here to this country. Immigration has always been an important part of our country. I know my grandfather came over here. My grandparents came over here, right? My grandfather, he didn't speak English. He had a very menial job when he came over, and he worked his way, he learned English, he had an opportunity. And so many of these human beings are human beings who are fleeing very, very horrible conditions where they live, and they have to be given an opportunity if they want to ask for asylum, to go through court cases, but there's got to be more resources put onto that. But yes, there is. Short answer is yes, there's a problem at the border, but there's a lot of reasons for it, and we have to do a lot more to have legal immigration into this country.
You mentioned the steps that Trump took to kind of bottleneck people on the other side of the border there, but isn't the Biden administration continuing those same things like Title 42?
Well, I believe that the courts is not allowing that anymore. And what happened during the Biden administration legally was, I'm not going to put any motive on it. It was done to keep the spread of COVID. So I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I think we can argue that there were other motivations, but the point is this that I'm trying to make is there's this huge backlog. It is, whenever we say probably tens of thousands of people. And so it's going to take a long time to try to get it to something humane and legal. But we have to have a pathway to citizenship. We have to have a way to process people, and that's going to take more resources. But there is, as I say, there's always what we call a sunshine at the end of the rainbow, or a rainbow at the end of the rain, or whatever, which is, we need immigration reform. We need a lot of these people who want to be here in this country to fill the work shortage gap that we have.
Title 42 that I just mentioned is, yeah, like you said, it's a COVID policy that, the immigration can keep people out of the country during a pandemic for health reasons. How, President Biden himself has said that the pandemic is over in large part. How can we still have a policy keeping people out for reasons related to the pandemic?
I don't think legally we can. I don't, well, maybe, I don't think legally we can. I think the problem is it's such a huge backlog right now. It's about catch up, being able to catch up.
Does the federal government, I mean, you don't want to just say, hey, we need to pour more money at the problem, I know, but is some of this just, like you said, we need more judges, we need more, the system needs to be broadened?
Yes, we need more judges, we need more lawyers, we need more technology, we need more of it all.
Martin, did you have anything?
No, I have no more questions.
Okay. I think that's largely all I had as well. So I'll end the conversation there, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.